Flashbulbs popped against the night sky as we stood before the north gate of the White House. My father held up his invitation, letting the lights catch its gleam. "You were not invited, Alex," he sneered. "Call a cab back to your apartment before you embarrass us." I did not argue. I walked up to the podium and handed the hostess a matte black card. When her scanner beeped, her face drained of color. She turned to the 4-star admiral standing nearby, trembling. "Sir, she is here." The admiral snapped to attention and saluted me. "Welcome, Director." The blood vanished from my father's face. "My name is Alexandra. I am 33 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated me like a stain on their perfect social record. They thought I was just a low-level government clerk pushing papers. Before I tell you how I burned their empire to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe karma is best served cold. I stood behind my father, Richard, waiting in the VIP security line for the state dinner. The area swarmed with Secret Service agents and politicians. My father adjusted his bespoke tuxedo, making sure everyone recognized him. He was a lobbyist who traded favors. Next to him stood my brother Bradley and his wife Jasmine. Jasmine was a striking black African-American woman who commanded attention. She wore a custom gown dripping with diamonds that cost more than my supposed salary. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple black dress. "Are you trying to follow us inside?" Jasmine asked loudly. "This is a state dinner, Alexandra, not a cafeteria at the Pentagon. They do not let it help desk workers in the front door." Bradley chuckled. "Let it go, Jasmine," he said, feigning pity. She probably wanted to see what real success looks like. For years, they had belittled my career. When I told them I worked for the Department of Defense, they assumed I was a low-level contractor fixing computers. They compared my modest lifestyle to their sprawling mansions. They never asked for details about my job, and I never offered them. Secrecy was the foundation of my life. Richard stepped forward, blocking my path. He looked at me with disdain. "I am not playing this game tonight, Alex," he warned. "Our firm is about to secure a $500 million defense contract. We are sitting at the primary table. I will not have you tagging along looking like a charity case. You were not invited. Go home." I looked at the gold-trimmed invitation in his hand. It granted him access to the politicians he wanted to bribe. It was nothing compared to the card sitting in my pocket. "I am not here with you," I replied calmly. "I am here for work." Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Work," she repeated, drawing stares from the crowd. "What are you going to do, reset the president's router? You are embarrassing us." The line moved forward and my family approached the podium. The hostess, a well-dressed woman named Ms. Dubois, greeted them with a practiced smile. Richard handed over his invitation with a flourish. "Richard and Bradley with +1s," he announced loudly, ensuring the crowd heard. Ms. Dubois scanned the invitation, and her smile widened. "Ah, yes, welcome, gentlemen. We have your table prepared in the main hall. Please proceed through the metal detectors." My father threw one last triumphant smirk over his shoulder at me. "Goodbye, Alex," he mouthed. As they moved toward the scanners, I stepped up to the podium. Ms. Dubois looked at me, her smile fading slightly. She judged my lack of designer labels. "I am sorry, ma'am. This entrance is for VIP guests only," Ms. Dubois said, her tone firm. I did not say a word. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a solid matte black card. It had no gold trim and no prominent logos. It had a highly encrypted microchip and a specialized barcode. I placed it gently on the podium. "Scan it," I said, my voice quiet but carrying an authority that made her hesitate. Miss Dubois let out an annoyed sigh, clearly humoring me. She picked up her scanner and aimed it at the card. The device emitted a loud, sharp beep. Instantly, her computer screen flashed bright red, overriding her guest list software. The screen displayed a level of security clearance most staff rarely saw. The color drained from Ms. Dubois' face. Her hands began to shake so badly she nearly dropped the scanner. She looked from the screen to me, and then back to the screen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Excuse me," Ms. Dubois squeaked out, her voice trembling. "Please wait right here." She abandoned her post, leaving a line of senators waiting. She ran over to a group of high-ranking military officials standing near the inner doors. She tapped the shoulder of a four-star admiral who was speaking with the Secret Service detail commander. I recognized him immediately. It was Admiral Harrison. Admiral Harrison turned around. His stern face shifted into an expression of respect. He bypassed the metal detectors and walked straight toward me, his boots echoing sharply. The crowd parted for him. My family had stopped at the checkpoint, turning around to see the commotion. Admiral Harrison stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He snapped to attention and delivered a perfect military salute. "Welcome, Director," he said, his voice booming. "We have been waiting for you. The Situation Room is secure and your seat at the head table is prepared." I turned to look at my family. The blood had completely vanished from my father's face. Bradley looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Jasmine's arrogant smirk had been wiped away, replaced by terror. They were frozen in the realization that the woman they mocked was pulling the strings. Exactly 1 week earlier, the crystal chandelier in my father's Georgetown dining room cast a harsh glare over the roasted pheasant. The dinner table was a battlefield disguised as a celebration. I sat quietly while my family practically vibrated with greed. Bradley leaned back in his velvet chair, swirling his expensive scotch. He looked like a man who had just swallowed the world. "The ink is practically dry," he announced. $500 million. The Department of Defense is handing us the keys to the kingdom." Jasmine clapped her hands, her diamond rings catching the light. She wore a silk emerald dress that screamed new money. "It will change everything," she said. "We are looking at that estate in Aspen. Bradley cannot fly commercial anymore. The delays are too stressful." My mother Catherine smiled at them from the head of the table. "You both deserve it," she cooed. "It takes a brilliant legal mind to navigate Washington." Richard cut his meat. "It takes vision, Catherine. It takes knowing exactly which palms to grease and which senators to corner. We outmaneuvered 3 major defense contractors for this. The Sentinel project is ours." I kept my face perfectly neutral. The Sentinel project. They were talking about the military's new encrypted communication grid, a project I had classified as a high-security risk. They had no idea they were sitting across from the woman who held the veto pen. Jasmine turned to me. "So, Alex," she purred. "How are things down in the basement?" I took a slow sip of water. "I do not work in a basement, Jasmine. I work in a secure facility." She waved dismissively. "Basement, cubicle, whatever. Did you fix that printer issue for the generals?" "I am an analyst," I replied. "I handle network architecture." Bradley snorted. "That is a fancy way of saying you change passwords. Can you believe she settled for a government salary? What do they pay you now, Alex?" 60,000. 85. I lied smoothly. Jasmine sighed. "Bradley spends that on a watch. I do not understand your lack of ambition, Alex. Look at Bradley closing a $500 million deal while you wear off the rack suits." Catherine chimed in with fake pity. "Leave your sister alone, Jasmine. Not everyone is cut out for real success. Alex likes her quiet, safe life." Richard pointed his fork at me. "You want the safety net but refuse to take risks. You could have joined my firm as an assistant and learned from Bradley. But you wanted to be a civil servant." I looked directly at my father. "I prefer to serve my country rather than sell it to the highest bidder." The table went dead silent. Bradley narrowed his eyes, his charm vanishing. "Watch your mouth, Alex. We facilitate defense. We secure the nation's future." Jasmine scoffed. "She is just jealous, Bradley. It must be hard watching us succeed while she counts pennies to pay rent." I smiled thinly. "I am just making an observation." Catherine slammed her glass down. "Alex apologized to your brother. You should be taking notes instead of making snide remarks." I did not apologize. I simply cut a piece of pheasant and placed it in my mouth, chewing slowly. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Jasmine leaned closer to Bradley, whispering, but making sure I could hear every word. "She is so bitter. It is pathetic, really. This is why she never gets invited to the galas. She has no idea how to behave around people of influence. She would embarrass you." Bradley nodded, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You are right. She lacks the pedigree. It is a shame, really. She could have been useful if she had just learned how to play the game. Richard wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. Let us move on to more important matters. The state dinner is next week. The president will officially announce the Sentinel project contracts there. We have the VIP table. This is our moment to solidify our dominance in Washington. Jasmine clapped, her eyes shining. I have an appointment with my stylist tomorrow. I need something spectacular. The press will be everywhere. We will be the center of attention. As they resumed their arrogant boasting, I remained silent. I mentally reviewed the Sentinel project files sitting on my encrypted servers. Bradley and Richard thought they had outsmarted the Pentagon. They thought their lobbying and bribes had secured their wealth. They thought I was a pathetic IT worker too stupid to understand their brilliance. They were wrong. Bradley pulled out a thick manila folder from his briefcase. He tossed it onto the table. Look at it, he boasted. The culmination of 3 years of relentless negotiations. Once those signatures are validated at the state dinner, we become untouchable. No one in this city will make a move without our permission. Jasmine traced the folder. Untouchable, she repeated. It has a beautiful ring to it. We will dictate the terms from now on. Richard nodded solemnly, raising his glass for a toast. To the Sentinel Project, to power, to the legacy of this family. They raised their glasses, eagerly clinking them together. Catherine joined in, completely ignoring me. I watched them celebrate a victory that would never materialize. Jasmine turned to me with mock concern. You know, Alex, you should let Bradley review your finances. You must be struggling. He could help you afford a decent car. I am fine with my finances, I replied. Bradley laughed. Sure you are. Do not come crying to us when your pension falls through. We will be too busy managing our global assets to bail you out. I rested my hands on my lap, feeling my smartwatch beneath my sleeve. Every arrogant word was being recorded. They were digging their own graves, and they were handing me the shovels. The dinner dragged on. I sat there absorbing every blow, knowing the storm was coming. The servers moved silently around the table, clearing the fine china plates and replacing them with crystal dessert bowls. My mother Catherine sighed heavily as she watched me decline the pastry. Look at you, Alex, she began, her tone dripping with disappointment. You sit there completely devoid of ambition. You have no drive, you have no vision. You are 33 years old, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it. I look at Bradley, and my heart swells with pride. He is building an empire. But you just take up space. You bring nothing to the family table. Jasmine swirled her wine, nodding in agreement. It is exhausting having to explain you to our friends, she added. People ask what my sister-in-law does, and I have to pretend your little government desk job is somehow noble. It is embarrassing. We are moving in circles with senators and tech billionaires while you probably pack your own lunch in Tupperware. I kept my hands resting gently on my lap, ensuring the microphone hidden in my smartwatch had a clear audio line. I pack my lunch because it is efficient, Jasmine, I said calmly. Richard slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table. The sudden noise rattled the crystal glasses. Enough of this pointless bickering, he commanded. Catherine is right. You contribute nothing to the family legacy, Alex. But tonight that changes. Tonight you finally have an opportunity to make yourself useful. My father reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick document bound in a blue legal folder. He tossed it across the table. It slid over the polished wood and stopped right in front of my water glass. I looked down at the bold printed letters on the first page. It was a property transfer agreement. More specifically, it was a total relinquishment of the deed to my late grandfather's estate in upstate New York. The property was a sprawling historic home sitting on 50 acres of prime real estate. It was the only asset my grandfather kept out of my father's greedy hands. He left it entirely to me because he knew Richard would destroy it. Sign it, Richard ordered. I have a notary waiting in the other room. We will get this finalized tonight. I did not touch the pen he slid toward me. I looked at the document and then back at my father. Why do you need my property? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. You just spent the last hour bragging about your $500 million defense contract. Surely you do not need my inheritance. Bradley leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at me with the condescending patience of a teacher explaining basic math to a slow child. "You do not understand how real business works, Alex," he sneered. "The Sentinel project is a $500 million deal, yes. But a contract of that magnitude does not just happen because we gave a good PowerPoint presentation. There are costs involved, substantial off-the-books costs." Jasmine chimed in, her eyes gleaming with greed. "You have to grease the wheels, honey. You have to take care of the people making the decisions. It is how Washington operates." I tilted my head slightly. "You are talking about bribes." Bradley laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Grow up, Alex. We call them facilitation fees. We have key international players and certain defense officials who require guarantees before they sign off on the final approvals. The problem is our corporate accounts are heavily audited. We cannot just wire $50 million to an offshore shell company without raising red flags with the IRS and the Department of Justice." Richard took over the explanation, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. "We need untraceable collateral. We need a clean asset entirely disconnected from our lobbying firm to secure a private loan from a foreign entity. Your grandfather's estate is completely unencumbered. It has no liens, no mortgages, and no direct ties to my corporate tax returns. It is the perfect vehicle. You want to use my grandfather's home to secure a bribe for a defense contract." I stated plainly, making sure the recording picked up every single syllable. "It is a temporary transfer," Bradley insisted, waving his hand dismissively. "We borrow against the estate, we distribute the facilitation fees, we secure the Sentinel contract, and then we pay the loan back with the first round of government funding. The estate gets transferred back to you in 6 months. No one will ever know." "And what if the deal falls through?" I asked. "What if the foreign entity seizes the property?" "The deal will not fall through," Jasmine snapped, adjusting her diamond necklace. "We have the VIP table at the state dinner next week. The president himself is announcing it. You are being paranoid and selfish." Catherine looked at me with pure disdain. "This is exactly what I mean about your lack of vision, Alex. Your father and your brother are securing the future of this family. They are elevating the Blackwell name to the highest tiers of global power. And all they ask is that you let them borrow a dusty old house you barely even visit. It is time you made a sacrifice for the greater good of this family." I looked at the four of them. They were absolutely shameless. They were openly admitting to federal crimes conspiracy to commit bribery violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and wire fraud. They were doing it casually over dessert because they genuinely believed they were untouchable. They believed I was too insignificant and too uneducated to understand the massive legal jeopardy they were putting themselves in. "You want me to sign over my only inheritance so you can commit international fraud," I said, making sure the words were crystal clear for the audio file. Richard slammed his fist on the table again, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Do not use that word in my house," he roared. "We are providing a service. We are playing the game the way the game is played. You owe me, Alex. I clothed you. I fed you. I paid for your worthless state college degree. You have lived in the shadow of my success your entire life. It is time you paid your debts." Bradley stood up from his chair, looming over the table. He pointed a threatening finger at my face. "You are going to sign that document tonight, Alex. You are going to sign it, or I swear to God I will make your life a living hell. I know people. I can have you fired from your pathetic little desk job by tomorrow morning. I can bury you in frivolous litigation until you are bankrupt and homeless." Jasmine smiled a wicked, satisfied smirk. "Just sign the paper, Alex. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You do not belong in our world. The least you can do is help us fund it. Be a good little sister and hand over the keys." The pressure in the room was suffocating. They had cornered me, orchestrated this entire dinner just to ambush me. They thought they had trapped a mouse. They had no idea they had just walked into a cage with a lion. I looked down at the blue legal folder. I picked up the heavy gold-plated pen my father had provided. I held it between my fingers, feeling the cold metal. The microphone on my wrist continued to record every breath, every threat, every piece of damning evidence. The silence in the dining room stretched tight like a piano wire ready to snap. They waited with bated breath, eager to snatch my legacy to fund their treason. I rolled the heavy gold-plated pen between my fingers. It was a Mont Blanc, an ostentatious symbol of my father's wealth. I looked at the signature line on the final page of the property transfer agreement. My father, Richard, leaned forward, his eyes fixed on my hand like a hawk watching its prey. Bradley hovered over my shoulder, practically vibrating with anticipation. Jasmine held her breath, her emerald silk dress rustling slightly as she shifted her weight. Catherine watched me with a tight, expectant smile. They were entirely convinced that I would fold. They believed a lifetime of emotional conditioning had stripped away my spine. I placed the pen down on the polished mahogany table. The quiet clink of metal against wood echoed loudly in the tense dining room. I pushed the blue legal folder back toward the center of the table. "I am not signing this," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger or fear. "I am not giving you my grandfather's estate so you can use it to fund a federal crime." For a fraction of a second, the room remained dead silent. They simply could not process what they had just heard. Then the reality of my refusal registered, and the facade of family unity shattered completely. Bradley erupted. He slammed both of his fists onto the dining table with such explosive force that my water glass tipped over. Ice cubes scattered across the expensive linen tablecloth, and water pooled near the legal documents. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The charming corporate lawyer vanished, replaced by a vicious bully who was used to crushing anyone who stood in his way. "You arrogant little wretch," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You think you can walk into this house, sit at this table, and tell us no? You think you have a choice. I will destroy you, Alex. I am a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in Washington. I will bury you in so many frivolous lawsuits, you will not be able to afford the bus ride to your pathetic government job. I will sue you for breach of verbal contract. I will sue you for emotional distress. I will tie up that estate in probate litigation for the next 30 years. By the time I am done with you, the legal fees will bankrupt you completely. You will be living on the street." I did not flinch. I did not lean back in my chair. I just sat there maintaining a terrifying, icy calm while he towered over me. Jasmine slammed her hands against the back of her chair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the upholstery. "You are a selfish, ungrateful failure," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We offer to elevate you. We offer to bring you into a $500 million circle of wealth and power. All you had to do was lend us an empty house. A house you do not even use, but you are too small-minded to understand loyalty. You have always been the weak link in this family. You take and you take, but the moment your family needs a simple favor, you turn your back on us. You are completely useless." My mother, Catherine, let out a dramatic sob, pressing a napkin to her chest. "How could you do this to us?" she cried, feigning heartbreak. "Your father has worked his entire life to provide for you. He gave you a roof over your head. We paid for your miserable state college tuition. And this is how you repay us. By sabotaging the greatest achievement in the history of our family. You are trying to ruin your brother's future because you are jealous of his success. You have always been a bitter, jealous girl." Richard did not yell. He stood up slowly, adjusting his suit jacket, his eyes cold and calculating. The mask of the benevolent patriarch had completely dissolved. He looked at me as if I were a piece of garbage that had tracked mud onto his expensive rugs. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Alexandra," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You are playing a game you do not understand with people who will not hesitate to crush you. If you walk out of this room without signing that deed, you will face consequences you cannot even begin to imagine. We are talking about $500 million. People disappear for a lot less in this city." The threat of physical violence hung heavily in the air. My own father was subtly implying that my safety was at risk if I obstructed his illegal bribery scheme. It was the ultimate betrayal, but it was also the exact piece of evidence I needed. Unbeknownst to my screaming family, I discreetly slid my left index finger over the face of my smartwatch. The device looked like a standard fitness tracker, but it was issued directly by the Department of Defense. I tapped the hidden side button twice. The screen remained completely dark, but a microscopic haptic vibration pulsed against my wrist, confirming the command. I had just activated a military-grade audio recording application. The software bypassed standard commercial encryption, locking the audio file into a secure compartment on the device. Simultaneously, it opened a silent background connection to a highly classified server located deep within my cybersecurity headquarters. Every single threat, every extortion attempt, every casual admission of bribery pouring out of my father and brother's mouths was currently being digitized, encrypted, and uploaded via a secure satellite link. They were handing me federal convictions on a silver platter. Bradley paced back and forth behind his chair, running his hands through his hair in a frantic motion. He was losing control, and he knew it. "I need that collateral by tomorrow morning, Alex," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I have international partners waiting for their facilitation fees. If I do not wire that money, the Sentinel contract goes to our competitors. Do you understand what you are doing? You are costing us $500 million. I will not let you ruin my life. I will take everything from you. I will hire private investigators to dig into your pathetic life. I will ruin your credit. I will make sure you never work in Washington again." Jasmine crossed her arms, glaring at me with absolute disgust. "You really think your little civil service union can protect you from us?" she mocked. "My husband plays golf with federal judges. We have senators on speed dial. You are a nobody, Alex, a nobody who is about to learn a very hard lesson about power." I looked at Jasmine and allowed a tiny ghost of a smile to touch the corners of my lips. She was lecturing the director of national cybersecurity about power. She was bragging about knowing federal judges to the woman who routinely briefed the President of the United States on global threat assessments. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice cutting through their screaming like a steel blade. Richard stepped forward, planting his hands firmly on the table and leaning his face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "We are not finished until you sign the document," he growled. "You are not leaving this house until that deed belongs to my firm. Do not test my resolve, Alex. You have no money. You have no influence. You have absolutely no leverage." I held his gaze, refusing to look away. I had all the leverage in the world. They were just too blind to see it. I took a deep breath, letting the icy calm settle over my entire body. The trap was set. The bait was in place. Now I just needed them to push me out the door. "Let me be completely clear," I said, pronouncing each word with deliberate precision. "I will never sign over my grandfather's estate. I will never fund your illegal lobbying efforts. And I am absolutely not afraid of your lawyers, Bradley." The room erupted again, a cacophony of vicious insults and furious threats raining down on me. I sat in the center of the storm, listening to the audio file securely uploading to my servers, knowing their empire was already dead. Richard realized that leaning over the table and shouting was not breaking my composure. He slowly stood up to his full height, smoothing the lapels of his custom suit. The red flush of anger on his cheeks faded into a mask of absolute freezing contempt. He looked at me, not as a father looks at a daughter, but as a predator looks at a trap he has just decided to walk around. "If that is your final answer, Alexandra, then we are at a crossroads," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "You have always tested my patience. You have always been the heavy stone dragging behind my ambitions. I tolerated your mediocre life because I believed that when the time came, you would finally recognize your duty to your bloodline. I see now that I was wrong. You are not just a disappointment. You are a liability." Catherine nodded eagerly from the head of the table, folding her hands together. "Listen to your father, Alex. He has given you everything. I am giving you one last chance." Richard continued, cutting his wife off with a sharp wave of his hand. "You have until midnight tonight to pick up that pen and sign the property transfer. If that deed is not in my hands by 12 o'clock, you are dead to me. Do you understand? You will no longer be my daughter. You will be stripped from my will. You will be banned from this property. If you ever try to contact us, I will have security throw you onto the street. You will be entirely erased from the Blackwell family history." Bradley crossed his arms, leaning back with a smug, satisfied grin. Good riddance, he muttered. We do not need a civil servant dragging down our public image anyway. To emphasize his point, my father turned his back on me and walked toward the ornate vintage safe built into the far wall of the dining room. He spun the brass dial, inputted a code, and pulled open the heavy steel door. He reached inside and withdrew a sleek leather portfolio. He brought it back to the dining table and unzipped it with slow, deliberate movements. He wanted to make a spectacle of this. He wanted to visually crush whatever remaining defiance he thought I harbored. He reached into the portfolio and pulled out 4 thick, cream-colored envelopes. They were heavily embossed with the presidential seal, the gold foil gleaming under the chandelier. He laid them out on the mahogany table, side by side, aligning them perfectly, like laying out 4 winning playing cards in a high-stakes game. Do you know what these are, Alex? He asked, his tone dripping with supreme arrogance. I kept my expression entirely blank, even though I knew exactly what they were. I had approved the security clearances for those specific invitations just 3 days ago. These, Richard boasted, tapping the first envelope with his index finger, are VIP invitations to the White House, state dinner scheduled for next week. They are not standard guest passes. These are platinum tier access credentials. We are seated at the primary table. We will be dining mere feet away from the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked hungrily on the envelopes. The entire Washington press corps will be there, she breathed excitedly. Everyone who matters in this country will be watching us. And do you know why we have these specific seats? Richard asked rhetorically, looking down his nose at me. Because next week at this exact dinner, the administration is officially announcing the Sentinel Project. They are bringing us up to the podium to shake hands with the top military brass. We are going to be globally recognized as the primary architects of American defense communication. $500 million of federal money will flow directly into our accounts the moment the dessert plates are cleared. He picked up the 4th envelope and held it up to the light. I watched his fingers grip the thick paper. There are 4 tickets here, he said, his voice laced with cruel intention. 1 for me, 1 for your mother, 1 for your brother, and 1 for Jasmine. But originally I requested 5. He paused, letting the implication hang heavily in the silent room. I fought for a 5th ticket. Richard lied smoothly. I cashed in major political favors to get an extra seat at that table. I intended to bring you Alex. I intended to let you sit with us, to let you bask in the glory of our success. I was willing to buy you a gown, hire you a stylist, and let you pretend you belonged among the political elite for just 1 night. I wanted you to witness the exact moment your family conquered Washington. Bradley snickered, taking a sip of his scotch. It would have been the highlight of your pathetic life, he added. You could have told all your little cubicle mates that you actually met a senator. But now, Richard said, his grip tightening on the envelope, now, I see that inviting you would be a catastrophic mistake. You lack the grace, the gratitude, and the fundamental loyalty required to sit at that table. You would only embarrass us. He tossed the envelope back onto the table. It slid and hit my water glass, coming to a stop just inches from my hand. So here is the ultimatum, my father declared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. You sign that deed right now, and I will request that 5th ticket from the Chief of Staff tomorrow morning. You sign over the estate, and I will allow you to share in the greatest triumph of our lives. You will get to walk through the North Gate. You will get to eat at the President's table. You will get a small taste of real, absolute power. He leaned in close, placing both hands flat on the table, his eyes burning with intense malice. But if you refuse, Richard hissed, if you walk out that door without signing, you will never step foot near the White House. You will spend the rest of your miserable life rotting at a metal desk, counting your pennies while we reshape the global defense industry. You will watch us on the evening news from your cheap apartment, knowing you threw away your only chance to be somebody. Catherine shook her head with a theatrical sigh. Do not be stupid, Alex. This is the last lifeline we are throwing you. Take it. I stared at the 4 gold-embossed envelopes lying on the table. The sheer audacity of their manipulation was almost impressive. They were trying to bribe me with access to an event that I was personally overseeing. They were threatening to withhold an invitation to a room where my security clearance superseded the Secret Service detail. I looked up from the envelopes, meeting my father's furious gaze. The military-grade recording device on my wrist had successfully captured every detail of their extortion attempt, tying the bribery scheme directly to the upcoming state dinner. The evidence was pristine. I slowly stood up, pushing my chair back from the table. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the marble floor. I did not reach for the pen. I did not look at the property deed. I adjusted my suit jacket and picked up my purse. I looked at the 4 people who had just permanently severed our bloodline for a payout they would never see. My silence hung in the room, thick and unyielding. Richard stared at me, his jaw muscles flexing as he realized my posture had not softened. I had not broken into tears. I had not reached for the pen. I had not offered a desperate plea for his conditional love. I simply stood there completely detached. "Fine," Richard spat, his voice dripping with venom. "If you choose to be a nobody, then you will be treated like a nobody." He picked up the 4th gold-embossed envelope from the mahogany table. He held it up to the chandelier light, letting the presidential seal catch the glare. He did not put it back into his leather portfolio. Instead, he turned his gaze deliberately toward Jasmine. "Jasmine," he said, his tone shifting from fury to a sickeningly sweet benevolence. "Call your mother tonight. Tell Beatrice she needs to secure a gown by Monday. She will be joining us at the state dinner. She will take the 4th seat at our table." Jasmine gasped, her eyes widening with genuine delight. She reached across the table and eagerly took the thick envelope from my father's hand. "Oh, Richard," she gushed, clutching the invitation to her chest. "My mother will be absolutely thrilled. She has been dying to attend a White House event. She actually understands the gravity of an evening like this. She knows how to converse with people of status." Richard nodded, keeping his eyes locked entirely on me, ensuring I felt the full weight of the exclusion. "Beatrice is a woman of refinement," he declared loudly. "She understands how the world works. She will be an asset to our table when the military officials come over to congratulate us." My mother, Catherine, swirled her wineglass. Her lips curled into a cruel smirk. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my simple navy suit and practical leather flats. She let out a short, mocking laugh. "It really is for the best," Catherine said, her voice slicing through the air. "Let us be brutally honest, Alex. You do not belong at a state dinner. Look at your clothes. That blazer looks like it came from a discount rack. You do not even wear proper jewelry. You have the exact demeanor of a mid-level clerk. You carry yourself like someone who fetches coffee for the people who actually make decisions." I kept my face perfectly still, letting her words wash over me. The hidden application on my smartwatch continued to record, digitizing every insult and uploading it to my secure servers. Catherine continued, leaning forward to inspect me like an insect under a microscope. "If you sat at our table, you would only humiliate Bradley. The Pentagon officials we are hosting expect to be surrounded by class and sophistication. They expect to interact with power. If they saw you sitting there looking like a depressed civil servant, they would question our entire firm's credibility. You would make us look weak." Bradley snorted, crossing his arms over his chest. "Can you imagine her trying to make small talk with a 4-star general?" he mocked, shaking his head. "She would probably try to explain how she fixes network routers. It would be a complete disaster. We need investors and defense contractors to look at our table and see absolute dominance. We cannot have some pathetic government employee bringing down the aesthetic." Jasmine gently placed the VIP invitation into her designer purse, treating it like a holy relic. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and supreme arrogance. "You are socially unfit to stand with this family, Alex," she stated, her voice laced with absolute certainty. "You lack the pedigree. You lack the conversational skills. You lack the basic understanding of how to exist in elite circles. My mother will charm the chief of staff. You would just sit there staring at your shoes. You are completely unfit for our world." The sheer magnitude of their delusion was breathtaking. They were calling me socially unfit to interact with Pentagon officials. They were claiming I would embarrass them in front of generals. They had absolutely no idea that the generals they were so desperate to impress reported directly to me. They had no idea that my clearance level dictated which of those defense contractors even received a security badge. They thought my practical suit was a sign of poverty. They did not realize it was the standard dress code for a woman who spent her days in classified briefing rooms, making decisions that shaped global cyber warfare. "You are making a permanent decision," I said, my voice steady and clear, ensuring the recording captured my final warning. "You are taking my invitation, and you are permanently removing me from this family." Richard laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the large dining room. "I am not removing you, Alex. You removed yourself the moment you refused to sign that deed. You chose to be useless, so you are being discarded. You are no longer my daughter. You are nothing to me." He pointed a rigid finger toward the dining room archway. "Get out of my house," he commanded. "Get out of my house and never come back. Go back to your pathetic little life and your meaningless government job. We are done with you." Catherine took a sip of her wine, not even bothering to look at me, as she delivered her final blow. "Do not call us when your pension gets cut, Alex. You had your chance to be part of an empire. Now you are just a stranger." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded, absorbing the finality of their betrayal. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. My footsteps echoed softly against the imported marble floors of the hallway. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, purposeful stride of a woman who knew exactly what was about to happen. As I reached the front foyer, I retrieved my wool coat from the closet. Behind me, I could hear the faint sounds of celebration resuming in the dining room. I heard the clink of crystal glasses. I heard Bradley laughing about the $500 million contract. I heard Jasmine excitedly calling her mother to deliver the news about the stolen White House ticket. They were celebrating their victory. They were toasting to their own brilliance and my supposed defeat. They thought they had broken me. They thought stripping me of a piece of paper and banishing me from their home was the ultimate punishment. I slipped my arms into my coat and buttoned it calmly. I looked around the lavish foyer, taking in the expensive artwork and the towering columns. I knew this would be the very last time I ever stood inside this house. By this time next week, this entire estate would likely be seized by federal agents. I opened the heavy mahogany front door and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The cold wind hit my face, but I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of clarity. The toxic weight of my family had finally been lifted. I pulled the front door shut behind me. The heavy click of the lock sounded like the closing of a prison cell, but I was the one standing on the outside. As the heavy click of the lock echoed behind me, I allowed myself a faint, chilling smile. My family thought I had simply walked away in defeat. They believed their vicious words and threats had finally broken my spirit. They were actively celebrating in the dining room, clinking their crystal glasses and toasting to their upcoming wealth. They had absolutely no idea what I had actually done during those final seconds inside the house. When Richard delivered his ultimate banishment, I did not shed a single tear. I had nodded in silent acceptance and calmly stood up from the mahogany dining table. I walked out of the room with my head held high, projecting the exact image of a defeated woman retreating into the night. But my exit was not a surrender. It was a highly calculated tactical maneuver. To reach the front foyer and retrieve my coat, I had to pass directly through the main living room. The grand space was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the expensive furniture. Sitting right there on the custom credenza was Bradley's work laptop. It was wide open. The screen was still glowing faintly in the dark room. He was so incredibly arrogant and so dangerously secure in his own untouchable status that he had not even bothered to lock the screen or close the lid. He had been reviewing the Sentinel Project files right before dinner and simply walked away to eat, leaving the most sensitive defense documents in the country completely unprotected. I heard the loud laughter erupting from the dining room. Richard was likely pouring another round of his expensive scotch. Jasmine was probably bragging about the designer gown her mother would wear to the White House. Their backs were turned. They were completely consumed by their own greed and their twisted sense of victory. They were entirely oblivious to the apex predator walking through their living room. From the hidden inner lining of my suit jacket, I retrieved a device no larger than a fingernail. It was a microscopic stealth cloning USB drive. This was not commercial hardware you could purchase at a tech store. It was a proprietary piece of technology developed by the highest tiers of national intelligence, designed specifically for elite covert operations. I walked past the credenza. I did not break my stride. I did not even turn my head to look at the laptop. Years of rigorous field training and intelligence operations had perfected my muscle memory. With a seamless sleight of hand, I brushed my fingers against the side of Bradley's computer. The microscopic drive slid perfectly into the port with a silent, invisible click. The moment the drive made physical contact, it executed a zero-day exploit. It bypassed Bradley's commercial-grade firewalls in mere milliseconds. It did not just copy files. It cloned the entire hard drive, capturing encrypted emails, deleted drafts, offshore banking routing numbers, and every hidden backdoor communication he had ever sent. The drive required exactly 12 seconds to siphon the massive payload of data and transmit a secure digital handshake to my servers. I kept walking smoothly, transitioning into the foyer. By the time I reached the coat closet and slipped my arms into my wool coat, the data transfer was completely finished. The device was designed to remain completely undetected, leaving absolutely no digital footprint behind. Bradley could hire the best civilian cybersecurity firm in the country, and they would never find the breach. The microscopic drive would sit quietly in his port, looking like a tiny piece of plastic casing, until I decided to detonate the evidence. Now, standing on the cold stone steps of my father's estate, I breathed in the crisp evening air. The tension that had coiled in my shoulders during the dinner completely evaporated. I walked down the long driveway toward my car. The gravel crunched beneath my sensible leather flats. Those were the exact same shoes my mother had just mocked, calling them the uniform of a low-level clerk. She had no idea those shoes had just carried the architect of her destruction right past her prized Persian rugs. I reached my vehicle parked just outside the heavy iron gates of the estate. It was a sleek, unassuming dark sedan perfectly designed to blend into any Washington traffic. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, the heavy door shut, sealing me inside a soundproof cabin. I pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life, but more importantly, the hidden digital console built into the dashboard illuminated. The screen flashed green, displaying a highly encrypted confirmation code. The payload was secure. The data from Bradley's laptop was already sitting safely in my isolated servers, waiting for my analysis. I rested my hands on the leather steering wheel and let out a slow, steady breath. My family thought they had stripped me of my power by taking away a piece of paper. They thought that barring me from the White House state dinner was the ultimate punishment. They believed that by discarding me, they were securing their path to absolute dominance. They were fools, absolute arrogant fools. They had invited the director of national cybersecurity into their home and openly confessed to a $500 million bribery scheme. They had threatened a federal official. They had detailed their plans to manipulate defense contracts. And they had left the entire blueprint of their treason sitting on an open laptop. I shifted the car into gear and pulled away from the curb. I did not look back at the sprawling mansion. I did not feel a single ounce of grief for the family I was leaving behind. They had made their choices. They had drawn the battle lines. They had told me I was unfit for their world. As I drove through the quiet upscale streets of Georgetown, the faint, chilling smile returned to my face. They were right about one thing. I was not fit for their world of petty bribes and desperate social climbing. My world operated on a much higher, much more dangerous frequency. I merged onto the highway heading toward Virginia. The city lights blurred past the windows as the speedometer climbed. I had 1 week until the White House state dinner. 1 week until the president officially announced the Sentinel Project. 1 week until my father and brother walked into the grand ballroom, expecting to be crowned the kings of Washington. They thought they were walking into a coronation. I was going to make sure they walked into a slaughterhouse. Section 8, 1,000 words. The tires of my sedan hummed a steady rhythm against the dark asphalt of the interstate. The glowing dashboard clock indicated it was just past 10 in the evening. I had exactly 168 hours until the White House state dinner. The countdown had officially begun. For my entire adult life, I had operated under a heavy, suffocating blanket of familial obligation. I had tolerated the snide remarks, the relentless comparisons, and the blatant disrespect because a small, naive part of my brain still craved my parents' validation. I had kept my true identity hidden, hoping that maybe one day they would love the quiet, unassuming daughter they thought I was. Tonight, that naive part of me died completely. It was not a slow fading away, it was a clean, surgical execution. As I drove past the Potomac River, the illuminated monuments of Washington cast long reflections on the dark water. This city ran on secrets and leverage. My father Richard believed he held the ultimate leverage because he could throw money at corrupt politicians. Bradley believed he held power because he could threaten people with corporate lawsuits. They operated on the shallow surface layer of the Capitol. They were bottom feeders swimming in a pond they thought was the ocean. They had no concept of the true deep currents of national security. I tapped a button on my steering wheel. The tinted windows of my vehicle polarized, locking me into complete darkness from the outside world. I initiated a voice command to my internal artificial intelligence system requesting a status update on the data packet. A sterile, robotic voice confirmed the upload to my secure servers was 100% complete. The payload was resting safely behind military-grade firewalls waiting for my command. The psychological shift happening inside my mind was absolute. I was no longer Alexandra, the disappointed daughter. I was the director. The shift felt like stepping out of a heavy, suffocating winter coat and feeling the cold, sharp air for the first time. I reviewed the events of the dinner not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of an intelligence officer analyzing a hostile target. Richard had freely admitted to a conspiracy to bribe foreign defense officials. Bradley had threatened a federal officer. Catherine had actively enabled the entire treasonous plot. They had laid out their entire operational blueprint over a plate of roasted pheasant. My vehicle merged onto the express lane. The speedometer climbed, but my heart rate remained perfectly steady. I thought about the 4 gold-embossed invitations sitting on the mahogany dining table. Richard had tried to use the White House as a weapon against me. He had weaponized an invitation to an event where I was essentially the guest of honor. The irony was so dense, it was almost suffocating. He wanted to parade his wealthy, successful family in front of the president to finalize a $500 million defense contract. A contract I had already flagged for critical security vulnerabilities. The Sentinel project was designed to be the next generation of encrypted military communications. It was a massive undertaking meant to secure the communications of our armed forces globally. Bradley and Richard thought they could bribe their way into controlling the infrastructure of our national defense. They viewed the military as a piggy bank to fund their private estates and designer wardrobes. They did not care about the lives of the soldiers who would rely on that network. They only cared about their facilitation fees. As I navigated the winding roads toward Northern Virginia, my mind organized the tactical layout of the coming week. I needed to analyze the cloned data. I needed to map the entire network of their corruption. I needed to identify every offshore account, every shell company, and every corrupt official they had paid off. The state dinner was not just a social event anymore. It was the perfect stage for a synchronized federal takedown. I was going to let them put on their tuxedos and their designer gowns. I was going to let them walk the red carpet and drink the expensive champagne. I was going to let them reach the absolute pinnacle of their arrogance before I severed the ground beneath their feet. The road inclined as I approached my sector. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. For 33 years, my family had treated me like I was invisible. They had looked right past me, assuming I was weak and incapable. Their arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. In the intelligence community, being invisible is the ultimate advantage. You cannot fight an enemy you do not even know exists. I was going to use their own blind spots to destroy them. The countdown ticked away in my mind. 167 hours and 45 minutes. The trap was set and they were eagerly running straight toward it. Section 9. 1,000 words. I turned off the main highway and approached a private unmarked access road tucked away in a highly exclusive enclave of Northern Virginia. There were no grand signs or ostentatious gates like my father's Georgetown estate. True power does not need to advertise itself. True power hides in plain sight. My vehicle approached a solid steel barricade disguised as a standard commercial garage entrance. I did not need to roll down my window or present a keycard. High-resolution thermal cameras scanned my license plate, and a laser matrix mapped the structural dimensions of my car. The steel doors slid open, silently swallowing my vehicle into the brightly lit underground bunker. I parked in my designated spot. The garage was entirely empty, save for a detail of 2 armed security contractors standing near the private elevator bank. They were highly trained former special operations personnel paid extremely well to ensure no unverified individual ever reached my floor. They did not speak. They simply gave me a crisp, professional nod as I walked past them. I stepped into the stainless steel elevator car. There were no buttons. I stared directly into the retinal scanner mounted on the wall. A thin red laser swept across my eye, analyzing the unique biometric markers of my iris. A mechanical voice chimed, confirming my identity. The elevator engaged, rocketing upward toward the penthouse level. The doors slid open, revealing my personal sanctuary. This was not the tiny, pathetic apartment my family constantly mocked. It was a multi-million-dollar, ultra-secure fortress spanning the entire top floor of the high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling blast-proof windows offered a panoramic view of the Washington skyline. The floors were polished black concrete, and the walls were lined with sound-dampening acoustic panels. It was austere, intimidating, and completely impenetrable. I bypassed the main living area and walked straight down the hallway toward the reinforced titanium door at the end. This was my command center. I placed my right hand flat against the biometric surface scanner and spoke my clearance code aloud. The heavy locking mechanisms disengaged with a deep, satisfying clunk. I pushed the door open and stepped into the nerve center of the national cybersecurity grid. The room was kept at a crisp 65 degrees to ensure the optimal performance of the server racks humming quietly along the back wall. The air tasted of ozone and sterile electricity. A massive curved display monitor spanned the entire length of the primary wall. As I entered, motion sensors detected my presence, and the screens flared to life. The glowing blue light illuminated the dark room. The central screen displayed a rotating 3-dimensional globe tracking live cyber threat assessments across multiple continents. I walked over to the primary terminal and took a seat in the ergonomic leather chair. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password and inserted a specialized cryptographic key into the drive. The screen flashed, rendering the official seal of the Department of Defense. Beneath the seal, bold white letters spelled out my true identity: Director of National Cybersecurity. I was not a mid-level clerk. I was not an IT help desk worker. I was the supreme authority over the digital infrastructure of the United States military. I held a rank equivalent to a cabinet member, reporting directly to the president and the top military advisors. Every single defense contract involving digital communications required my personal authorization. I possessed absolute unilateral veto power. If I found a single vulnerability in a proposed system, I could kill a billion-dollar contract with a single keystroke. My family thought they were manipulating the system. They thought they could bribe their way into the Pentagon. They did not realize that I was the gatekeeper. I owned the gates. I built the walls. I commanded the army that protected the network. I pulled up the secure file transfer interface. The data payload I had extracted from Bradley's laptop was resting in a quarantine folder isolated from the main network to prevent any malicious software from spreading. I initiated the decryption sequence. The server processors hummed louder as they broke down Bradley's commercial-grade encryption. It was like watching a master locksmith pick a cheap padlock. The progress bar moved steadily across the screen. I watched the numbers climb, feeling a deep sense of absolute control. My brother had threatened to bury me in frivolous lawsuits. My father had threatened to erase me from the family history. My sister-in-law had called me socially unfit. They had handed me their entire operational playbook. The decryption sequence hit 100%. A new folder populated on my desktop labeled simply Sentinel Project Target Data. I clicked the mouse, opening the folder. Hundreds of thousands of files populated the screen. Emails, banking records, offshore wire transfers, encrypted chat logs. It was a treasure trove of federal crimes. I cracked my knuckles and leaned closer to the monitor. It was time to dissect their empire piece by piece. I pushed back from the heavy desk and let the leather chair glide silently across the polished concrete floor. Before diving into the abyss of my family's corruption, I needed a moment to center my focus. I walked over to a sleek built-in wet bar near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Washington pulsed in the distance, a sprawling grid of power and secrets. I reached for a crystal tumbler and a bottle of aged single malt scotch. I poured exactly 2 fingers. The amber liquid glowed under the recessed lighting. I did not drink to forget. I drank to sharpen the edges of my focus. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the burn travel down my throat. It was the taste of absolute control. I carried the glass back to the command terminal and settled into my chair. The massive curved monitor illuminated my face with the stark white light of thousands of indexed files. Bradley was a partner at a ruthless corporate law firm, but his digital hygiene was laughably pathetic. He operated with the reckless impunity of a man who believed the rules simply did not apply to him. He had categorized his illicit dealings in nested folders with painfully obvious titles. It was the digital equivalent of leaving a murder weapon on the dining room table. I initiated a forensic sorting algorithm, commanding my artificial intelligence system to isolate financial routing numbers, offshore bank accounts, and encrypted communication logs. The screen fractured into a dozen different data streams. I watched the algorithm map out their entire financial ecosystem in real time. Red lines traced illegal wire transfers from defense lobbyists in Washington to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. From there, the money was laundered through a labyrinth of phantom corporations in Cyprus and Switzerland before settling into private accounts controlled directly by Richard and Bradley. The sheer scale of their bribery was staggering. They had successfully compromised 2 mid-level generals and several civilian procurement officers at the Pentagon. The facilitation fees Bradley had brazenly mentioned at dinner were clearly documented in Excel spreadsheets. He had listed the bribes as consulting retainers and legal advisory fees. It was textbook wire fraud and conspiracy. I had enough evidence right there to send my father and my brother to a federal penitentiary for 20 years. But as I cross-referenced the offshore accounts against known threat databases, a completely different anomaly caught my attention. One specific financial pipeline did not originate in Washington. It flowed in reverse. Massive sums of dark money were being wired from a holding company in Macau directly into an escrow account managed by Bradley's law firm. The payments were categorized as technical compliance bonuses. I frowned, setting my scotch down on the desk. Lobbyists pay bribes to politicians to win defense contracts. They do not receive millions of dollars in dark money from foreign entities unless they are providing something highly illicit in return. I isolated the Macau holding company and ran a deep packet inspection. The server hummed a low warning pitch as it hit a sophisticated foreign firewall. It took my system exactly 4 seconds to obliterate their defenses. The holding company was a known front for a hostile foreign intelligence syndicate. My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I frantically opened Bradley's encrypted email logs, cross-referencing the dates of the Macau wire transfers with his technical communications regarding the Sentinel project. I found a hidden thread of messages exchanged between Bradley and a foreign handler using a burner email address. Bradley was not a software engineer, but he was acting as the middleman for a team of compromised civilian contractors. I opened the attachments tied to the foreign emails. Pages upon pages of modified source code flooded my screen. I recognized the architecture immediately. It was the core framework for the Sentinel project. The military communication grid was designed to be a closed-loop, impenetrable system. But the modified code Bradley was passing back and forth contained a deliberate, catastrophic vulnerability. It was a zero-day backdoor intricately woven into the encryption protocols. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Richard and Bradley were not just bribing Pentagon officials to win a lucrative contract. They were actively selling a backdoor access point to a hostile foreign power. In exchange for the $500 million government payout and millions more in dark money bribes, they were intentionally compromising the entire global communication network of the United States Armed Forces. If this code went live, our military operations would be completely transparent to foreign enemies. Troop movements, classified drone strikes, naval fleet deployments, all of it would be intercepted in real time. My father and my brother were willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands of American service members just so Jasmine could buy a ski estate in Aspen and Richard could boast at the country club. This was no longer a case of white-collar corporate corruption. This was high treason. This was a direct violation of the Espionage Act. It carried a penalty of life in a federal supermax facility or execution. I sat back in my chair, my breath catching in my chest. I looked at the undeniable proof staring back at me from the monitors. For 33 years, my family had called me a failure. They had mocked my government salary and ridiculed my modest lifestyle. They had told me I lacked the vision to understand real power. They were right about one thing. I did not understand their version of power. Their power was built on a foundation of rot and treason. My power was built on absolute unyielding protection of the nation. They thought they were throwing me a lifeline by offering me a seat at their table. They had no idea they were inviting the executioner into their house. I reached across the desk and pressed a secure red button on my primary communication console. A direct encrypted line opened immediately to the Pentagon. The line did not ring. It connected instantly to the private quarters of my highest-ranking military counterpart. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the first second. "Harrison here." "Admiral," I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure, lethal authority. "I need you to initiate a priority, one tactical lockdown. Cancel all your morning briefings and mobilize a joint strike task force with the FBI and the Department of Justice." There was a brief pause on the line. The Admiral recognized the severity of my tone. "What do we have, Director?" he asked sharply. I took a final sip of my scotch. "I have a confirmed breach of the Sentinel project involving high treason and foreign espionage," I replied. "And the primary targets are scheduled to attend the White House state dinner next week. We are going to let them put on their tuxedos, and then we are going to burn them to the ground." The line went dead. I placed the red receiver back onto its secure cradle. The silence in my command center felt different now. It was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of a loaded weapon. Admiral Harrison was a man of ruthless efficiency. He did not ask for my underlying reasoning, and he did not question my authority. He simply mobilized. Within the hour, the highest echelons of the Department of Justice and the FBI would be sitting in a windowless room at the Pentagon, reviewing the digital carnage I was about to send them. But raw data was not enough for a flawless federal indictment. I needed airtight, unassailable proof tying Richard and Bradley directly to the malicious source code. I turned my attention back to the massive curved monitor. The primary decryption had cracked the commercial firewalls, but Bradley had hidden the specific cryptographic keys within a secondary heavily fragmented partition on his hard drive. He likely thought this made the transaction deniable. He assumed federal investigators would hit the fragmented wall and assume the data was corrupted. I cracked my knuckles and began coding a brute force sequencer. I bypassed the standard graphical interface and dropped directly into the command line, programming a specialized algorithm to hunt for the fragmented keys. The servers roared to life, their cooling fans spinning up to maximum capacity as they processed trillions of cryptographic permutations per second. I reached for my tumbler of scotch and took another slow sip. The amber liquid was warm against the cold, sterile air of the server room. I watched the progress bars creeping across the dark screens. It was a digital siege. I was methodically tearing down the walls of their treasonous empire brick by invisible brick. While the sequencer chewed through the fragmented partition, I opened a secondary window to monitor their live communications. My stealth USB was not just a static cloning device. It had embedded a persistent beacon in Bradley's machine, establishing a real-time relay to my servers. I had full access to his active network traffic. I could see every email he sent, every text message he received, and every calendar notification that popped up on his screen. It was simultaneously fascinating and repulsive to watch their sheer arrogance unfold in real time. A message popped up from Jasmine to Bradley. She had just finalized the purchase of a custom designer gown for her mother. The receipt attached to the email showed a staggering $15,000 charge. Jasmine had added a note to the email stating she could not wait to see the look on the generals' faces when they walked into the grand ballroom. She was actively preparing to dazzle the exact military commanders her husband was currently trying to sell to a foreign syndicate. Another email arrived in Bradley's inbox. This one was from Richard. My father had forwarded a draft of a press release their lobbying firm planned to publish the morning after the state dinner. The headline boldly claimed that our family was ushering in a new era of impenetrable national security. The sheer hypocrisy of the statement made my stomach turn. They were drafting self-congratulatory press releases while facilitating the largest cybersecurity breach in American history. I focused my eyes back on the primary terminal. The brute force sequencer chimed a sharp, high-pitched note of success. The fragmented partition shattered. The progress bars vanished, replaced by a cascading waterfall of raw, decrypted data. I had broken the final seal. I quickly isolated the newly exposed files. There they were, the cryptographic hash keys directly matching the malicious backdoor code sent by the holding company. Bradley had digitally signed the transfer logs using his own private encrypted key. He had literally left his digital fingerprints on the murder weapon. The chain of custody was absolutely perfect. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard and Bradley had knowingly and willfully accepted foreign funds to compromise the Sentinel project. I compiled the unredacted, decrypted files into a single secure dossier. I attached a digital signature authenticating the evidence under my authority as the Director of National Cybersecurity. With one keystroke, I transmitted the entire dossier through the secure channel to Admiral Harrison and the waiting federal task force. The trap was now fully operational. The Department of Justice had everything they needed to draft sealed indictments for high treason, espionage, and wire fraud. The FBI had the operational blueprint to coordinate the arrests, and I had the absolute authority to execute the final blow in front of the entire Washington elite. The next 6 days blurred into a marathon of tactical preparation. I barely left the subterranean bunker. I slept in short bursts on a small cot in the corner of my office, sustained by strong black coffee and the cold, burning fuel of righteous justice. I held daily encrypted video conferences with the FBI Tactical Commander and Admiral Harrison. We mapped out the exact logistics of the state dinner. We designated the primary insertion points for the undercover agents. We established the precise communication signals that would initiate the takedown. Every detail had to be flawless. Richard and Bradley were highly connected individuals. If they sensed even a fraction of a misstep, they would leverage their political contacts to slip away or destroy evidence. We needed to catch them at the exact pinnacle of their arrogance. We needed to isolate them in a room where their money and their influence meant absolutely nothing. On the 5th day, I watched a calendar alert pop up on Bradley's cloned network feed. It was a reminder for a final fitting for his custom tuxedo. He had attached a note to Richard expressing his excitement for the dinner. He wrote that they were about to become untouchable. I stared at the glowing text on my monitor. I felt no pity. I felt no residual familial attachment. The people buying those expensive suits and drafting those arrogant emails were domestic terrorists. They had traded their loyalty to this country for a payout. They had casually discarded me because they thought I was a worthless roadblock to their wealth. I closed the live feed and locked my terminal. The digital work was finished. The evidence was secured. The indictments were sealed. All that remained was the physical execution of the operation. I stood up from my leather chair and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the capital city. Tomorrow night, the north gate of the White House would open for the most exclusive social event of the year. My family would arrive expecting a coronation. They would walk the red carpet completely blind to the guillotine waiting for them in the grand ballroom. I turned away from the window ready to dress for the occasion. I turned away from the window ready to dress for the occasion. Before I could take a single step toward my private quarters, a sharp high-priority alert sliced through the quiet hum of the server room. The primary monitor flashed a brilliant amber warning. My artificial intelligence system had been running continuous background diagnostics on the raw data cloned from Bradley's laptop. It had just detected an anomaly buried deep within the architecture of the hard drive, bypassing the initial decryption sweep. I walked back to the leather chair, dropping into it while scanning the alert. Bradley was arrogant, but the people he was dealing with were professional ghosts. They used advanced steganography to hide a phantom directory inside a massive block of mundane system files. It was an invisible puzzle box designed to self-destruct if opened incorrectly. My system had quarantined the phantom directory, isolating it within a secure sandbox environment to prevent counterattacks. I initiated a manual override taking direct control. I could not rely on automated algorithms. I needed to peel back this final layer myself, using specialized cryptographic scalpels to extract the core data without triggering the fail-safes. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, inputting lines of raw code to stabilize the directory. The process required absolute precision. One wrong keystroke and the files would turn to digital ash. The amber warning light faded, replaced by the stark white glow of an accessible folder. I clicked the mouse, opening the directory. The screen populated with a series of highly compressed video files and digitized legal contracts. I opened the first document. The breath caught in my throat. My previous discoveries had proven bribery and an attempt to distribute modified source code. But this new cache of data was the undeniable smoking gun of high treason. It was the deepest, most rotten layer of the onion. The document on my screen was a formal memorandum of understanding, drafted on the official stationery of a notorious state-sponsored intelligence syndicate known for orchestrating catastrophic cyber attacks against Western infrastructure. The terms outlined in the memorandum were horrifying in their explicit cruelty. Richard and Bradley had actively negotiated the specific technical parameters of the breach. In exchange for the $500 million government payout and an additional untraceable bonus of $200 million paid in offshore cryptocurrency, my family agreed to embed a dormant logic bomb directly into the Sentinel project's primary defense matrix. I opened the corresponding technical schematics. As the Director of National Cybersecurity, I understood the architecture of the Sentinel project better than anyone on the planet. I read the modified code, feeling a cold, terrifying dread wash over me. The logic bomb was designed to target the early warning missile detection systems of the United States Armed Forces. If this code had been deployed, it would create a blind spot in our national defense grid exactly 14 minutes wide, 14 minutes where hostile foreign actors could maneuver without triggering any alarms at the Pentagon. My father was trading the safety of the entire North American continent for a VIP table and extra zeros in his bank account. He was selling millions of innocent lives so Jasmine could buy designer jewelry and Bradley could fly on private jets. I clicked on the first video file. A grainy, high-definition recording filled the screen. The footage was date-stamped 3 months ago. It showed the private dining room of a luxury hotel in Macau. Richard and Bradley were sitting across from 3 men in tailored suits, confirmed operatives for the Foreign Intelligence Syndicate. I boosted the audio, leveling out the background noise. Bradley's voice echoed from the speakers, dripping with his usual smug confidence. "We control the narrative in Washington," he boasted to the foreign agents. "My sister works in the lower levels of the Defense Department. She is a clueless civil servant, but her security credentials allow us to bypass the initial vendor screenings. We use her name on the compliance forms to fast-track the Sentinel approval. She has absolutely no idea what is happening. We bypass the red tape and you get your access point." My stomach churned with pure disgust. They were actively framing me as the unwitting accomplice. They planned to use my name to legitimize their corrupted software, putting the entire burden of federal guilt squarely on my shoulders if the backdoor was ever discovered. Richard chimed in on the video, his tone casual. She is entirely disposable, he told the foreign operatives. If the Department of Justice launches an inquiry, all digital trails will point to her network authorization. We take the money, and she takes the fall. It is a flawless execution. I paused the video. The frame froze on my father's smiling face as he casually negotiated the destruction of my life to secure his treasonous payday. The sheer depth of their betrayal defied human comprehension. They were planning to send me to a federal prison for the rest of my life, or put me in front of a firing squad for espionage just to cover their tracks. The icy calm that had sustained me over the past week solidified into something much harder. It turned into absolute diamond. I was no longer just protecting the national security grid. I was delivering the wrath of a woman who had been marked for slaughter by her own flesh and blood. I compiled this new devastating cache of evidence, encrypting it into an execution package. The trap I had built was already lethal, but this new data turned it into an inescapable black hole. They were not just going to be arrested for bribery anymore. They were going to be locked in a subterranean federal supermax facility, where they would never see the sunlight again. I shut down the terminal and walked away from the glowing screens. The time for digital forensics was over. The time for absolute destruction had arrived. I walked across the polished concrete floor of my command center, leaving the primary terminal behind, and entered the secure communication vault. The walls here were lined with copper mesh, creating a perfect Faraday cage. No signals could enter or leave without passing through my encrypted router. I sat at the steel table in the center of the room and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner panel. A high-definition monitor descended from the ceiling, dropping into place with a mechanical hum. I initiated a priority override video link directly to the secure situation room at the Pentagon. The screen flickered for only 2 seconds before the imposing figure of Admiral Harrison appeared. He was in full dress uniform, sitting at the head of a massive conference table. Flanking him were the director of the FBI and a senior prosecutor from the Department of Justice. They had been waiting for my update. Director the Admiral said, his voice echoing slightly in the secure channel. "We received your initial dossier. The tactical teams are on standby, but you flagged an emergency escalation. What have you found?" I looked at the 3 most powerful men in national law enforcement and military security. I just intercepted a ghost directory hidden within Bradley's fragmented files. I replied, my voice echoing coldly in the vault. "Gentlemen, we are no longer dealing with a simple bribery and wire fraud case. This is a coordinated act of high treason." I pressed a button on my console, transferring the Macau hotel video file and the modified Sentinel source code to their localized screens. I watched their faces as the evidence played out. I watched the FBI director's jaw clench. I watched the DOJ prosecutor lean forward, taking rapid notes. And I watched Admiral Harrison's eyes turn into chips of frozen ice as he heard my father and brother casually negotiate the installation of a zero-day logic bomb into our missile defense early warning system. When the video reached the point where Richard explicitly outlined his plan to use my security credentials to bypass Pentagon firewalls and frame me for the breach, the silence in the situation room was absolute. Admiral Harrison was the first to speak. His voice was dangerously quiet, a lethal whisper that promised absolute ruin. They were going to sell out the entire North American defense grid for a paycheck. They were going to put thousands of my service members in the crosshairs of a foreign syndicate. And they were going to use my name to do it, I added. "Admiral, I need confirmation right now. I need to know that we are not just going to quietly arrest them in their offices tomorrow morning. I need this to be a public execution. I need the entire syndicate they are working with to see exactly what happens when they try to compromise my network." The FBI director folded his hands on the table. "You want to execute the sting at the White House state dinner?" "Exactly," I said. "They are arrogant. They believe they have completely outsmarted the federal government. They are walking into the grand ballroom expecting the president to hand them a $500 million contract. We are going to let them believe they won. We are going to let them take their seats at the VIP table. We are going to let them taste the absolute pinnacle of Washington power, and then we are going to drop the hammer." The DOJ prosecutor adjusted his glasses. "We have the legal authority. The evidence you just transmitted is a flawless smoking gun. We can draft sealed indictments for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the United States. But coordinating an armed raid inside the White House during a state dinner requires impeccable timing. The Secret Service will need full integration into the operational plan. I already have the logistical framework mapped out. I told them projecting a digital blueprint of the White House Grand Ballroom onto their screens. Richard and Bradley requested the primary VIP table near the podium. We give it to them. But we control the seating chart. The defense contractors and foreign diplomats they think they are dining with will actually be undercover federal agents and specialized military police. Admiral Harrison nodded, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. A containment ring. They will be entirely surrounded by our people before the first course is served. Precisely, I said. Jasmine and Catherine will be sitting right there with them, completely oblivious. They will be bragging to your undercover agents about their new wealth. Meanwhile, the Secret Service will secure all exterior exits. No one leaves the ballroom. What is the signal for the takedown? The FBI director asked, leaning forward. I will be giving the keynote address regarding the Sentinel project, I replied. The Chief of Staff has already agreed to yield the floor to me. I will stand at the podium, and I will project their treasonous communication logs onto the main screens for every single guest to see. The moment I officially veto their contract on the grounds of the Espionage Act, your agents move in. You cuff them right at the table. You drag them out in their custom tuxedos and designer gowns. The DOJ prosecutor jotted down a final note. The Asset Forfeiture Division will be standing by. The second the cuffs go on, we freeze every single bank account, shell company, and property tied to the Blackwell name. They will be rendered completely destitute before they even reach the holding cells. We are in agreement, Admiral Harrison stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. The military police will coordinate with the FBI tactical units. We will secure the perimeter. Director, you have authorization to proceed with the trap exactly as you have outlined. Bring them down. I terminated the connection. The monitor slid back into the ceiling, leaving me alone in the silent copper-lined vault. The strategic planning was complete. The federal machinery was officially in motion and nothing could stop it now. The trap was a masterpiece of lethal precision, engineered to exploit their insatiable greed and their blinding arrogance. I stood up from the steel table and walked out of the vault. I moved through the penthouse toward my master bedroom. The digital warfare was over. The physical confrontation was imminent. I opened my walk-in closet and bypassed the rows of practical navy suits and simple flats my family loved to mock. I walked to the very back where a protective garment bag hung in the shadows. I unzipped it, revealing a floor-length tailored tactical evening gown in midnight black, designed specifically to conceal specialized communication gear, and a ceramic-plated holster. My mother had told me I lacked the class to stand in a room with generals. My sister-in-law had called me socially unfit. They had laughed at me while attempting to sell my country to the highest bidder. I stared at the dress, feeling the absolute calm of an apex predator waiting in the tall grass. The countdown was over. The night of the state dinner had arrived. Let the slaughter begin. The memory of my preparation in the bunker faded instantly as the cold Washington breeze snapped me back to the present moment. I stood at the north gate of the White House, perfectly still. Admiral Harrison's rigid military salute hung in the crisp evening air. "Welcome, Director," he had said, his voice booming over the chatter of the gathered elite. The blood completely vanished from my father's face. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered across Richard's mouth only seconds ago melted into an expression of sheer, unadulterated shock. He stared at the four-star admiral and then slowly turned his gaze toward me. His mind simply could not process the data. Beside him, Bradley looked like he had been struck by lightning. His jaw hung slightly open, his expensive tailored tuxedo suddenly looking rigid and uncomfortable. Jasmine blinked rapidly, her eyes darting between my simple black tactical evening gown and the heavily armed Secret Service agents flanking the entrance. Her mother, Beatrice, clutched her stolen VIP ticket to her chest, looking entirely bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere. That ticket was supposed to be mine. They had stolen it to punish me, to prove I was unfit for their glittering world. They had spent the entire car ride to the gate, laughing at my expense, telling me I was socially unfit for this environment. Now the very gatekeepers of that world were bowing to me. There is a misunderstanding, Richard finally sputtered, stepping forward and waving his gold-embossed invitation. Admiral, there is a massive mistake here. This is Alexandra. She is my daughter. She is a low-level civil servant at the Pentagon. She fixes computers. She does not have the clearance to be in this sector. Admiral Harrison did not even acknowledge my father. He kept his eyes fixed respectfully on me. The Secret Service detail commander, a broad-shouldered man with an earpiece, stepped smoothly between my father and the podium. He did not say a word. He simply raised a flat, imposing hand, signaling Richard to stop exactly where he was. I nodded to the Admiral, acknowledging his salute. "Thank you, Admiral," I said, my voice projecting a calm, absolute authority. "The perimeter is secure." "As secure as possible," Director Harrison replied, dropping his salute and falling into step beside me. "The Chief of Staff is awaiting your arrival in the Grand Ballroom." The Secret Service commander snapped his fingers. Immediately, 4 heavily armed agents moved in perfect synchronization. They unclipped the heavy brass hooks of the velvet ropes separating the standard entry queue from the pristine, untouched red carpet reserved strictly for foreign heads of state and top-tier cabinet members. They formed a protective corridor shielding me from the press corps and the general VIP guests. Director Bradley suddenly shouted, his voice cracking as the reality of the title hit him. He pushed against the velvet rope, his corporate lawyer entitlement overriding his basic survival instincts. "Wait a minute. Director of what? Alex, what is going on here? You are an analyst. You do not have red carpet access. Step back immediately, sir," an agent commanded, stepping directly into Bradley's personal space. His hand rested, hovering dangerously close to his tactical holster. "I am a senior partner at a top law firm," Bradley yelled, his face flushing with angry color. "We are the guests of honor tonight. We are here to finalize the Sentinel project. My father and I are sitting at the primary table. You cannot treat us like common tourists. Tell them, Alex. Tell them we are together. Tell them this is a massive misunderstanding and that we belong inside that ballroom." I stopped walking. I stood on the center of the plush red carpet surrounded by federal agents and top military brass. I slowly turned my head and looked at my brother. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of an executioner examining the condemned. "I am not with them," I told the detail commander, my voice echoing clearly over the murmuring crowd. "I have never seen these people before in my life. Process them through standard secondary screening." The commander tapped his earpiece. "You heard the director. Move them to holding pen B for secondary verification." Suddenly, the velvet ropes shifted. The agents did not treat them like VIP guests anymore. They treated them like potential security threats. 2 agents grabbed the stanchions and physically corralled Richard, Bradley, Jasmine, and Beatrice away from the main entrance, pushing them toward a stark, brightly lit security holding area off to the side. It was a humiliating glass-walled pen, designed for aggressive pat-downs and intense background checks. "Do not touch me!" Jasmine shrieked as an agent firmly guided her by the shoulder. "This is a custom Oscar de la Renta gown. You are wrinkling the silk. Do you have any idea who my husband is? We are about to be $500 million richer. I will have your badge for this." Catherine, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly began striking the glass wall of the holding pen. "Alex," she screamed, her voice muffled by the thick, bulletproof glass. "Alex, tell them to stop. Tell them who we are. We are your family." Richard slammed his hands against the glass, holding up his gold VIP ticket, as if it were a magical shield. "I demand to see the Chief of Staff," he bellowed, his face purple with rage. "I am a highly respected Washington lobbyist. This is an outrage. I am bringing a massive defense contract to this administration. You are ruining my night." I stood on the red carpet watching them thrash and scream inside the transparent box like trapped animals. They looked so incredibly small. Stripped of their Georgetown mansion and their expensive scotch, They were nothing but desperate grifters panicking at a security checkpoint. All their arrogant boasting, all their cruel insults, all their threats of disownment meant absolutely nothing in the face of actual federal authority. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel invisible. Now they were the ones trapped behind a glass wall screaming for an audience that completely ignored them. The Washington press corps gathered near the entrance began snapping photographs of the bizarre scene. The highly respected lobbyists were being treated like common criminals at the security gate, while the daughter they claimed was a pathetic clerk was being escorted by a four-star admiral. The flashing camera lights illuminated their panicked, humiliated faces. It was the perfect opening act for the slaughter that was about to follow. "Let them wait in secondary screening until the appetizers are served," I instructed the commander. "I want them to have plenty of time to contemplate their seating arrangements." "Understood, Director," the commander replied. I turned away from the glass-holding pen, severing eye contact with my father. I did not look back as I walked down the pristine red carpet toward the towering illuminated columns of the White House. The heavy oak doors swung open ahead of me. The faint sound of a string quartet drifted out into the night air. The trap had been successfully triggered, and the prey was securely locked inside the cage. It was time to take my seat at the head of the table. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, silencing the cold Washington wind. The grand ballroom of the White House was a masterpiece of gilded architecture. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of dark tuxedos and vibrant silk gowns. A string quartet played softly in the corner, providing an elegant soundtrack to the most ruthless political arena on Earth. Secret Service agents guided me past the standard seating to the elevated primary table positioned right beside the presidential podium. I took my seat. My name card did not say Alexandra. It read Director of National Cybersecurity. I picked up my crystal water goblet and surveyed the room. The trap was perfectly laid out. To the untrained eye, this was a standard gathering of politicians, defense contractors, and foreign diplomats. To me, it was a highly coordinated tactical grid. The sommelier pouring wine at the adjacent table was the lead tactical commander for the FBI. The foreign dignitary laughing near the ice sculpture was an undercover operative for the Department of Justice. The entire ballroom was a federal holding cell disguised with fine china. It took exactly 45 minutes for my family to clear secondary screening. I watched the ballroom doors swing open. Richard marched inside, his face flushed a furious shade of red from the prolonged humiliation of the security pen. Bradley followed closely behind him, violently adjusting his tie. Jasmine and her mother Beatrice walked in last. Jasmine was furiously trying to smooth out the wrinkles in her custom designer gown. They looked flustered and angry, but the moment they saw the flashing cameras, their arrogant facades snapped right back into place. They believed they owned the room. Jasmine immediately spotted a group of high-ranking senators' wives gathered near the champagne tower. She grabbed Beatrice by the arm and marched directly toward them, desperate to reclaim her social standing. I watched from the elevated table as Jasmine inserted herself into their circle. Her voice carried over the elegant music, loud and incredibly boastful. "It is just so exhausting managing these massive government contracts," Jasmine declared, tossing her hair back and flashing her diamond rings. "Bradley has been working directly with the Pentagon all week. The Sentinel project is a $500 million initiative, and they absolutely begged us to handle the infrastructure. We are practically running the Defense Department at this point. We are flying to Aspen next week to celebrate closing the deal." The senators' wives exchanged polite, tight-lipped smiles. They had no idea who Jasmine was, but the undercover FBI agents standing right behind them were listening to every single word. Jasmine was willingly providing a verbal confession of her husband's involvement right in front of federal witnesses. She pointed a manicured finger toward the front of the room, completely oblivious to the fact that her every movement was being monitored. She was parading around in her silk dress, acting like royalty while standing directly in the crosshairs of a federal sting operation. Across the room, Richard was on a mission. He completely ignored the appetizers and the open bar. His eyes darted around the ballroom until he spotted his primary target. The White House Chief of Staff was standing near the central walkway speaking with Admiral Harrison. Richard grabbed Bradley by the shoulder and bulldozed his way through the crowd of dignitaries. He was desperate. The delay at the security gate had cost him valuable networking time, and he needed to secure a public handshake before the official announcements began. A photograph of him shaking hands with the chief of staff was the ultimate political currency. I tapped the small earpiece hidden beneath my hair. The audio channel connected me directly to Admiral Harrison and the chief of staff. "My father is approaching your 12 o'clock," I murmured, keeping my eyes fixed on my water goblet. "Let him make his pitch." "Copy that." Director, the chief of staff replied softly into his own lapel microphone. "We are holding the line, holding the. Richard pushed past a group of naval officers and aggressively inserted himself into the conversation. He thrust his hand out, flashing his most charismatic predatory smile. "Mr. Chief of Staff," Richard boomed, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of the surrounding photographers. "Richard Blackwell. We spoke last month regarding the Sentinel project. My firm is handling the final logistical clearances. I just wanted to personally thank the administration for trusting us with this $500 million initiative." Bradley stepped up right beside him, mirroring his father's aggressive posture. "We are ready to execute the final signatures tonight," Bradley added smoothly. "We have our international partners fully aligned. The transition will be seamless. We are honored to secure the nation's defense." I watched them from my elevated seat. They were practically salivating. They were standing in the White House openly bragging about the exact contract they had just sold to a foreign intelligence syndicate. They thought they were untouchable. They had absolutely no idea that the international partners Bradley just proudly mentioned were actively being hunted by federal agents. The chief of staff looked at Richard's outstretched hand. He did not take it. He did not smile. He simply stared at my father with an expression of cold, calculated indifference. Richard kept his hand suspended in the air. The confident smile on his face began to fracture. The cameras continued to flash, capturing the incredibly awkward rejection. Bradley shifted his weight nervously. He glanced around, noticing that the naval officers nearby had stopped talking. The atmosphere around them was growing dangerously tense. The FBI operative, posing as a sommelier, took a subtle step closer to Bradley's flank. The trap was tightening, and they could feel the pressure changing in the room, but their overwhelming greed prevented them from seeing the truth. Richard dropped his hand, his face reddening again. "I understand you are busy tonight," he said, attempting to recover his dignity. "We have the primary VIP table right by the podium. We look forward to the official announcement." The chief of staff finally spoke, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a knife. "The official announcements will begin shortly, Mr. Blackwell. I suggest you take your assigned seats. The administration is about to make a very clear statement regarding the future of our national security." Richard nodded eagerly, completely misinterpreting the lethal undertone of the statement. "Absolutely," he agreed. "We are ready." My father turned around and patted Bradley on the back. They walked toward their assigned table, looking incredibly smug. They walked past the undercover agents. They walked past the military police. They took their seats completely oblivious to the fact that they were never walking out of this building as free men. I watched them sit down, and I finally allowed myself a genuine smile. It was time to take the podium. Section 15, 1,000 words. I stood up from my chair at the elevated primary table. The movement was subtle, but in a room heavily monitored by federal agents, it served as the ultimate kinetic trigger. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. A heavy, expectant hush fell over the grand ballroom. The clinking of crystal and the low murmur of Washington elite faded into absolute silence. At their assigned table near the front, Richard and Bradley leaned forward in their chairs. They adjusted their posture, wearing identical expressions of greedy anticipation. They believed this was the moment their empire would be cemented. Jasmine pulled out her smartphone, holding it up to record the announcement. Catherine sat up straight, smoothing her gown, ready to bask in the reflected glory of her husband's corrupt triumph. The White House chief of staff stepped up to the main podium. He adjusted the microphone and looked out across the sea of dignitaries. "Good evening, distinguished guests," he began, his voice echoing powerfully through the ballroom speakers. "Tonight we gather to secure the future of our nation. The defense of our country relies not just on the strength of our military, but on the absolute impenetrable security of our digital infrastructure. Richard nodded sagely, wrapping an arm around the back of Catherine's chair. He whispered something to Bradley, likely bragging about how his lobbying efforts had scripted this exact speech. The chief of staff continued. We are facing unprecedented threats from foreign intelligence syndicates. To combat these threats, the president relies on the absolute authority and unmatched expertise of one individual. Tonight, it is my profound honor to yield this podium to the architect of our digital defense grid. I stepped out from behind the head table and began my descent toward the center stage. My midnight black tactical gown swept silently across the plush carpet. The spotlight tracked my movement, instantly bathing me in a stark, brilliant circle of white light. The chief of staff turned his entire body toward me. He did not extend his hand for a simple greeting. Instead, he bowed his head in a deep, formal show of absolute respect. Please welcome, he announced, his voice booming through the silent ballroom, the Director of National Cybersecurity. The reaction at my father's table was a masterpiece of human neurological failure. Richard was in the middle of taking a sip from his water goblet. He froze. His eyes locked onto me, standing in the spotlight. The expensive crystal glass slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the table and shattering into dozens of sharp pieces. Iced water spilled across his lap, but he did not even flinch. He simply stared, his mouth hanging slack, his breathing entirely stopped. Bradley blinked rapidly, leaning so far forward he nearly fell out of his chair. He rubbed his eyes aggressively as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked from the chief of staff to the podium and back to me. His brain aggressively rejected the visual data it was receiving. He had spent his entire adult life convinced I was a pathetic, low-level clerk making $60,000 a year. Now he was watching the White House chief of staff bow to me in front of the entire defense sector. Jasmine dropped her smartphone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Her jaw went completely slack. The arrogant socialite who had just proudly declared I was socially unfit to stand with their family was now staring at me while I commanded the attention of the most powerful people on the planet. Catherine clutched her chest, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her expensive silk dress, gasping for air as if the oxygen had just been sucked out of the room. I walked up the steps to the main stage. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the excruciating reality of my identity burn into their retinas. Every step I took was a hammer striking the final nails into the coffin of their arrogant delusions. I reached the podium and placed my hands flat against the polished wood. I looked directly down at my family. We were separated by a mere 20 feet, but the power dynamic between us spanned an unbridgeable galaxy. I was standing shoulder to shoulder with the Secretary of Defense and Admiral Harrison. They were sitting at a table surrounded by undercover federal agents waiting to throw them in a cage. Thank you, Chief of Staff, I said, leaning into the microphone. My voice resonated with cold, absolute authority. The sound of my voice, amplified through the presidential acoustic system, acted like a physical blow to my father. He physically recoiled, sinking lower into his chair. This is not possible, Bradley whispered loudly enough for the directional microphones to pick up his panic. This is a joke. She is a clerk. She fixes routers. Admiral Harrison, who was seated at the head table just behind my podium, leaned forward and fixed his gaze directly on Bradley. You will remain silent, Mr. Blackwell. The Admiral commanded, his voice slicing through the air with lethal military precision. You are in the presence of the Director. You will show the proper respect, or I will have the military police remove you from this room immediately. Bradley swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. He shrank back into his seat, his corporate bravado completely pulverized by the four-star general's threat. I adjusted the microphone and let my eyes sweep across the ballroom, making sure to hold my father's terrified gaze for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He was sweating profusely. The heavy fabric of his custom tuxedo looked suffocating. He finally understood the gravity of his mistake. He had threatened to bury me. He had promised to ruin my life if I did not help him facilitate his treasonous bribery scheme. He had told me I lacked the pedigree to sit at his table. He was right. I did not belong at his table. I belonged at the head of the room holding the executioner's axe. The power shift was absolute. The dynamic of our entire 33-year relationship had been inverted in a matter of seconds. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the disappointment they could mock and discard at their convenience. I was the highest-ranking cybersecurity official in the federal government. I held the keys to the nation's defense grid, and I held the undeniable proof of their high treason securely locked in the servers of the Pentagon. I looked at Jasmine, who was shaking violently in her designer gown. I looked at Catherine, who was hyperventilating into a linen napkin. I looked at Bradley, who was gripping the edges of his chair like a man bracing for a car crash. And finally, I looked at Richard, the architect of his own destruction. Tonight, I announced, my voice echoing coldly across the grand ballroom, we are here to discuss the Sentinel Project. We are here to talk about the future of our encrypted military communications. But more importantly, we are here to talk about loyalty. We are here to talk about the severe, uncompromising consequences for those who choose to betray this nation. I pressed a button on the hidden console built into the podium. The massive digital screens flanking the main stage flared to life, preparing to display the unredacted evidence of their treason. The trap was locked. There was absolutely no escape. I stared down at my father, ready to deliver the final lethal blow. The massive digital screens illuminated the grand ballroom with a harsh, sterile glare. The ambient light shifted instantly from warm gold to icy blue. On the displays towering 20 feet high, the unredacted files from Bradley's laptop appeared in razor-sharp resolution. I did not start with the financial records. I started with the raw, corrupted code. The audience of politicians and diplomats murmured in confusion. They were expecting promotional videos or corporate logos. Instead, they were staring at thousands of lines of dense programming syntax. But the military officials in the room, the generals and admirals who understood the gravity of cybersecurity, instantly sat up straighter. Their trained eyes scanned the highlighted red text I projected onto the center of the screens. What you are looking at is the core architecture of the Sentinel Project, I announced. My voice was steady, echoing with absolute authority through the presidential acoustic system. It was designed to be the impenetrable shield for our global military communications. It was meant to secure the lives of every man and woman serving in our armed forces. But the code on this screen has been intentionally compromised. I pressed the console button again. The screen split in half. On the left side, the corrupted code remained. On the right side, a series of highly classified emails appeared. The sender was Bradley, and the recipient was a known alias for a hostile foreign intelligence syndicate based in Macau. I directed my gaze straight down at my brother. Bradley was gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were entirely white. The smug, arrogant lawyer who had threatened to bury me in frivolous lawsuits was now visibly shaking. This modified code contains a zero-day backdoor. I continued translating the technical data into plain, terrifying English for the civilian politicians in the room. It is a logic bomb engineered to blind our early warning missile detection systems for exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes where our enemies could maneuver, strike, and devastate our infrastructure without triggering a single alarm at the Pentagon. A collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. The air was sucked out of the room. Senators who had accepted campaign donations from my father's lobbying firm suddenly looked physically ill. Wives of defense contractors covered their mouths in horror. The string quartet players lowered their instruments, staring at the screens in pure shock. I switched the slide again. Now the screens displayed the offshore financial routing numbers. The massive wire transfers from Cyprus and Switzerland were highlighted in bright yellow. This vulnerability was not a mistake, I declared, my voice ringing like a steel bell. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. And it was sold to foreign operatives by the lobbying firm sitting at the primary table tonight. In exchange for the $500 million government payout and an untraceable offshore bonus of $200 million, Richard and Bradley Blackwell agreed to hand over the keys to our national defense. Bradley jumped to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the plush carpet. "This is a lie!" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "She fabricated this data. She is a disgruntled employee. She hacked my computer to frame us. I did not even raise my voice to counter his desperate outburst. I simply pressed another button. The screen zoomed in on the digital signature attached to the modified source code transfer. "That is your personal cryptographic key, Bradley," I stated coldly. "It matches your biometric login and your private network credentials. You signed the transfer logs yourself. You left your digital fingerprints on the weapon you plan to use against your own country." Bradley collapsed back into his seat as if his legs had been kicked out from under him. He looked at his father for help, but Richard was completely paralyzed. The patriarch of the family, the man who believed he controlled Washington, was sweating profusely. Heavy beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead, soaking into the collar of his custom tuxedo. He looked toward a group of senators he had bribed for years, silently pleading for an intervention. Every single one of them turned their backs on him, stepping away, as if he were carrying a deadly plague. Jasmine and Catherine were trembling uncontrollably. Jasmine clutched her expensive diamond necklace, her eyes darting frantically around the room as she realized the glamorous life she had been bragging about was entirely funded by blood money. Catherine wept silently, her socialite facade entirely stripped away, exposing the pathetic, greedy reality underneath. They had told me I was unfit to stand with their family. They were about to find out that their family was entirely unfit to exist as free citizens in this country. I looked away from their terrified faces and addressed the entire ballroom. The time for the final blow had arrived. Under the authority vested in me as the Director of National Cybersecurity, I possess absolute unilateral veto power over all Department of Defense digital infrastructure contracts I announced. I am officially exercising that power tonight. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the silent, terrified crowd. The $500 million Sentinel contract proposed by Blackwell Consulting is hereby permanently vetoed and terminated, I declared. Richard let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest. He was watching his $500 million empire turn to ash in real time. But I was not finished. The financial ruin was only the beginning. Furthermore, I continued, my voice dropping into a lethal, uncompromising register. This termination is not based on a simple technical failure. It is executed under the direct provisions of the Espionage Act. The unredacted evidence displayed behind me proves a coordinated, premeditated conspiracy to commit high treason against the United States of America. The words high treason hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. It was the ultimate legal hammer. It was a charge that carried no statute of limitations and offered absolutely no leniency. My family had tried to sell the nation to fund their luxury, and I had just publicly signed their death warrants. The presentation was complete. The veto was official. The trap was about to spring shut. Section 17, 1,000 words. I gave a sharp, definitive nod to the back of the room. The signal was received. Instantly, the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom burst open with earth-shattering force. The elegant string quartet music was drowned out by the deafening sound of heavy tactical boots slamming against the polished marble floors of the outer hallway. Dozens of federal agents wearing full tactical gear and Kevlar vests stormed into the room from every single available exit. The bold yellow letters of the FBI and the Department of Justice were emblazoned across their black tactical armor, creating a jarring, violent contrast to the sea of shimmering silk gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos. The undercover operatives who had been posing as waiters, diplomats, and foreign dignitaries simultaneously dropped their disguises. The sommelier, who had been pouring expensive wine at the adjacent table, reached under his tailored vest and drew a standard-issue sidearm, racking the slide with a sharp metallic clack. He held up a gold federal badge and shouted for all civilian guests to step back and remain seated. Panic rippled through the ballroom, but the tactical perimeter was established flawlessly in mere seconds. The military police formed an impenetrable wall of armed guards securing all perimeter access points. No one was leaving this room. The primary target was the VIP table located directly beneath my elevated podium. A specialized extraction team of federal agents descended upon my family like a pack of starving wolves. Richard stood up, knocking his chair violently backward onto the carpet. He held up his hands not in surrender, but in an arrogant, desperate attempt to assert his rapidly evaporating authority. I am a prominent Washington lobbyist. He roared, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. You cannot do this to me. I have powerful senators on speed dial. Do you have any idea who I am? The lead FBI tactical agent did not hesitate. He did not care about Richard's political connections or his custom-tailored suit. The agent lunged forward, grabbing Richard by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo and violently spun him around. Richard let out a choked, terrified gasp as he was forcefully slammed face first down onto the primary table. The heavy impact shattered the remaining crystal water goblets and crushed the fine porcelain dinner plates. Expensive red wine spilled across the crisp, white linen tablecloth, soaking directly into the 4 gold-embossed VIP invitations my father had proudly flaunted earlier that evening. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage, wire fraud, and high treason, the agent bellowed, pressing his heavy knee firmly between my father's shoulder blades. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. The harsh metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Richard's wrists echoed clearly over the stunned, terrified silence of the grand ballroom. Beside him, Bradley completely lost his mind. The smug, arrogant corporate lawyer panicked completely. He shoved his chair violently aside and made a desperate, pathetic dash toward the side exit, hoping to disappear into the crowd. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 heavily armored military police officers intercepted his path, executing a flawless, brutal, tactical takedown. They swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing hard onto the plush presidential carpet. I am a senior partner, Bradley screamed, thrashing wildly against the floor as the officers pinned his arms forcefully behind his back. You cannot arrest me without a warrant. This is an illegal detainment. I will sue the federal government for everything it has. I will have your badges stripped by tomorrow morning. We have a sealed federal indictment signed by a federal judge. An officer replied coldly, driving his knee into the small of Bradley's back. Your prestigious law firm is currently being raided by the Cyber Division. You are going straight to a federal holding facility. The officers wrenched Bradley's arms upwards, securing the handcuffs so tightly the cold metal bit into the French cuffs of his tailored shirt. His face was pressed directly into the carpet, his arrogant legal threats reducing to breathless, panicked sobbing as the reality of a life sentence set in. Jasmine watched her husband being brutalized by federal authorities, and her self-preservation instincts kicked in. She turned her back on Bradley, entirely lifting the hem of her custom designer gown and attempting to slip away into the crowd of terrified dignitaries. She was immediately blocked by 3 plainclothes agents wearing dark suits and earpieces. They were from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent, a tall, stern woman, stepped directly into Jasmine's path. Jasmine Blackwell, the IRS agent, stated flatly, holding up a federal warrant. Get out of my way, Jasmine shrieked, clutching her diamond necklace. I have done nothing wrong. My husband handles the business. You have nothing. The IRS agent corrected her voice, slicing through Jasmine's hysterical delusion. As of 60 seconds ago, the federal government executed a total asset freeze. Your joint bank accounts are seized. Your offshore holding companies in Cyprus are locked. The deed to your Aspen ski estate has been seized by federal forfeiture. Your credit cards are dead. The jewelry you are wearing was purchased with illicit funds and is now federal property. You are completely destitute. Take off the necklace. Jasmine let out a piercing, guttural wail, collapsing onto her knees, sobbing uncontrollably as absolute poverty crashed down upon her. Catherine witnessed the utter annihilation of her family from her seat. The illusion she had cultivated was ripped apart in 2 minutes. The wealthy, powerful dynasty was gone, replaced by federal agents and steel handcuffs. She threw her head back and began to scream hysterically. It was a raw, piercing sound of pure psychological destruction. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her expensive makeup smeared as heavy tears poured down her face. She looked around the ballroom at the senators' wives she had tried to impress. They were looking at her with absolute disgust and horror, backing away from her table. Catherine turned her wild, panicked eyes toward the main stage. She looked up at me standing behind the presidential podium, flanked by military commanders. Her daughter, the one she called a failure, was standing untouched above the carnage. I looked down at the twisted, screaming wreckage of my family. I did not blink. I did not move. I just watched them burn. The federal agents hauled my father up from the ruined table, dragging him roughly by the arms of his ruined tuxedo. He stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the spilled wine, and shattered crystal scattered across the floor. For a fleeting moment, the sheer panic coursing through his veins gave him an unexpected surge of desperate adrenaline. He violently wrenched his left shoulder, twisting out of the agent's grip. Before the tactical officers could re-establish their hold, he lunged forward. He did not run toward the exit. He scrambled directly toward the main stage. He collapsed at the base of my elevated podium, his knees hitting the hard wooden steps with a heavy thud. The proud, arrogant patriarch who had spent his entire life looking down on everyone else was now physically prostrating himself at my feet. The agents closed in immediately, drawing their tactical batons, but I raised my right hand. I gave a sharp tactical gesture signaling them to hold their position. I wanted every senator, every defense contractor, and every foreign diplomat in the grand ballroom to witness this exact moment of supreme, unadulterated humiliation. Alex, he begged, his voice cracking. He tilted his head upward, exposing a face slick with cold sweat and tears. He was weeping openly, his chest heaving with terrified, erratic gasps. "You have to stop this. You are the director. You have the authority. Tell them to stand down. Tell them to release us." I stared down at him, leaning against the edges of the presidential podium. He was a broken shell of the man who had threatened to erase me from the family history a week ago. "You have absolute immunity power," he pleaded, his voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. "You can classify this entire operation. You can sweep it under the rug. We will give the money back. We will cancel the contracts. Just make the federal agents leave. Please, Alex, I am begging you." He reached out his handcuffed wrists, straining against the cold steel as he tried to grab the hem of my tactical evening gown. I stepped back smoothly, keeping myself entirely out of his reach. "We are blood," he screamed, thick tears rolling down his flushed cheeks. "We are family. You cannot send your own father and brother to a federal supermax facility. You cannot destroy your own mother. Think about loyalty, Alex. Think about your legacy. Families protect each other. You have to protect us." His desperate pleas echoed through the silent ballroom, amplifying his absolute disgrace. He was weaponizing the very concepts he had completely disregarded his entire life: blood, loyalty, family. He had traded all three for a foreign payout and a gold VIP ticket. He was crying for a daughter he had discarded, hoping that the ghost of my childhood desperation would compel me to save his life from utter ruin. But that desperate little girl was gone forever, and only the ruthless director remained standing in her place. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man kneeling on the steps of the presidential podium. He was waiting for a flicker of hesitation. He was searching my face for any trace of the daughter who had spent her entire life trying to earn his approval. He found absolutely nothing. My expression was a mask of absolute zero-degree empathy. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm completely unaffected by his theatrical sobbing. The biological connection between us meant less than the dust on my tactical shoes. "You want to talk about family?" I asked, my voice projecting through the ballroom speakers with a quiet, terrifying clarity. "You want to invoke loyalty to save yourself from a federal prison?" Richard nodded frantically, his heavy steel handcuffs clinking against the wooden steps. "Yes, Alex. We are your blood. You have to save us. You have the power." I leaned closer to the microphone. The entire room held its collective breath. "Exactly 1 week ago, you sat in your Georgetown dining room and gave me an ultimatum," I stated flatly, making sure every diplomat and military official heard the full measure of his hypocrisy. "You told me I was a liability. You handed my VIP invitation to a stranger just to twist the knife. And when I refused to help you fund your treasonous bribery scheme, you told me to get out of your house. Richard's eyes widened in sheer terror as his own cruel words were weaponized against him. The blood drained from his tear-streaked face. You looked me dead in the eye. I continued, my tone dropping into an absolute freezing register. You explicitly said I was not invited to be part of this family anymore. You told me I was entirely erased from the Blackwell history. You demanded that I go back to my pathetic little life. I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify his absolute devastation. I am just following your instructions, Richard, I said, delivering the ultimate satisfying blow. I am no longer part of your family. I am the Director of National Cybersecurity. And right now, I am just taking out the nation's trash. I straightened my posture, turning my back on him completely. I looked at the lead tactical agent standing a few feet away and gave a single sharp, definitive nod. The agents did not hesitate. Two massive tactical officers grabbed Richard by the shoulders of his ruined tuxedo and hoisted him violently to his feet. He let out a piercing, guttural scream as they dragged him backward away from the podium. Across the room, the military police hauled Bradley off the carpet. My brother was hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of a life sentence shattered his corporate arrogance. Alex. Richard roared, his voice cracking as the agents dragged him toward the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom. You cannot do this. We are your family. Please, Alex. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, severing his desperate screams. The grand room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The traitors were gone. I remained at the podium for a few more seconds, allowing the absolute magnitude of the moment to settle over the Washington elite. I looked at the faces of the senator's defense contractors and foreign diplomats. The message was delivered with surgical precision. Treason would be met with total annihilation. I stepped down from the stage, and the chief of staff immediately took my place at the microphone, gracefully steering the state dinner back to order, while acknowledging the swift actions of the federal task force. I did not return to my seat. My work for the evening was complete. The subsequent weeks unfolded exactly as my algorithms had predicted, playing out like a highly orchestrated symphony of federal justice. The media frenzy was absolute. The Blackwell name, previously associated with high society and lucrative government access, was instantly synonymous with the greatest espionage scandal of the modern era. The federal task force moved with ruthless efficiency, dismantling their empire brick by brick. I watched the legal proceedings from the secure confines of my cybersecurity bunker, receiving daily updates from the Department of Justice. Bradley never even made it to trial. Faced with the mountain of encrypted communications and the undeniable digital fingerprints he had left on the modified source code, his high-priced defense attorneys immediately advised him to surrender. He was formally disbarred in disgrace, stripped of the legal credentials he used to intimidate people. The arrogant corporate lawyer traded his tailored Italian suits for a standard-issue orange federal jumpsuit. He signed a plea agreement that guaranteed he would spend the rest of his natural life in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There would be no parole. There would be no appeals. He would fade into absolute obscurity, locked in a concrete cell far away from the power he desperately craved. Richard's fate was equally severe. The patriarch, who believed he could buy the United States military, was indicted on 34 counts of wire fraud, bribery, and high treason. His vast network of corrupt politicians scrambled to distance themselves, abandoning him instantly to save their own careers. He was denied bail, deemed a massive flight risk. He aged decades in a matter of weeks, his health failing rapidly as the reality of his permanent incarceration set in. He stood before a federal judge, looking frail and pathetic, completely stripped of the arrogant armor he had worn his entire life. Jasmine experienced the most abrupt and humiliating collision with reality. The Internal Revenue Service did not just freeze her assets, they obliterated them. Federal asset forfeiture agents descended upon the Georgetown mansion and the Aspen estate, armed with heavy cardboard boxes and clipboards. Jasmine screamed and sobbed as agents systematically cataloged and seized her custom Oscar de la Renta gowns, her diamond necklaces, and her imported luxury vehicles. Everything she had flaunted was classified as the proceeds of federal crimes. Left entirely penniless, she was evicted from the seized properties and forced to move into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. She tried to call her wealthy friends begging for loans, but every single number she dialed suddenly went straight to voicemail. But her misery did not end with poverty. The DOJ intercepted emails proving she had knowingly signed fraudulent tax documents to hide the offshore bribery payments. She was formally indicted for financial conspiracy, facing a minimum of 10 years in a federal women's correctional facility. Catherine was left to wander the ashes of her shattered socialite status. With her husband and son locked in federal supermax prisons and all marital assets seized by the government, she was forced to rely on a meager state pension. She moved into a tiny, damp apartment in a neighborhood she previously would not have dared to drive through. She was entirely excommunicated from Washington society. The bridge clubs, the charity galas, and the elite social circles completely blacklisted her. She spent her days entirely alone, surrounded by cheap furniture, stripped of the luxury she had valued above her own daughter's life. As their world burned to the ground, my world expanded into unbridled, absolute authority. 6 months after the state dinner, I stood on the Truman balcony of the White House. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of cherry blossoms. Below me, the South Lawn stretched out in perfect manicured darkness, and the Washington Monument glowed brilliantly against the night sky. The city was quiet, operating smoothly under the impenetrable digital shield my agency maintained. Admiral Harrison stepped onto the balcony, his metals glinting in the soft light. He held 2 crystal flutes of vintage champagne. He handed one to me and stepped up to the railing, looking out over the capital city. The final sentencing came down this morning. The Admiral stated, his voice carrying a quiet, deep satisfaction. The judge gave them the maximum penalty across the board. The syndicate in Macau has gone completely dark. You successfully severed the head of the snake director. The national defense grid is entirely secure. I looked down at the bubbling champagne in my crystal flute. I had successfully excised the rot from the core of the nation, and in the process I had completely excised the rot from my own life. I was no longer the unwanted child. I was no longer the scapegoat bearing the weight of their impossible toxic expectations. I had used their boundless greed to engineer their ultimate destruction. I raised my glass toward the illuminated monument. To national security, I said, my voice steady and clear. Admiral Harrison clinked his glass against mine. To absolute power, Director. I took a slow sip of the cold champagne. The taste of victory was sharp and flawless. I stood on the balcony of the most powerful residence on the planet, fully emancipated from the ghosts of my past. I held absolute control over my destiny, answering to no one but my own moral compass. A cold, triumphant smile slowly spread across my face. I had taken out the trash and the house was finally clean. If you enjoyed watching this toxic family receive the absolute justice they deserved, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ultimate revenge. Share your thoughts in the comments below on how you would have handled a family like this. Thank you for watching, and always remember, true power never needs to brag. The story of Alex's confrontation with her deeply corrupt and abusive family serves as a powerful testament to the importance of defining your own self-worth. For years, Alex existed in the suffocating shadow of her family's arrogance, enduring their relentless mockery and conditional love. The profound lesson embedded in her journey is that your true value is never determined by the inability of toxic people to recognize it. Often those who belittle us do not do so because we are inadequate, but because diminishing others is the only way they can sustain their own fragile illusions of power and control. We are frequently conditioned to believe that blood ties demand unconditional loyalty, even at the severe cost of our own mental and emotional well-being. Alex's ultimate triumph was not just in exposing her family's treason, but in completely freeing herself from the desperate need for their validation. The moment she realized that their approval was a poisoned chalice, she reclaimed her autonomy. This narrative teaches us that walking away from a toxic environment is not an act of surrender. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you cannot build an authentic life while trying to fit into a mold created by people who fundamentally disrespect you. True strength lies in the quiet, unwavering belief in your own capabilities. It comes from doing the hard work in the shadows, cultivating your skills, and building a foundation so solid that no one's cruel words can shake it. Family should ideally be a sanctuary of mutual support, not a battlefield of extortion and manipulation. When the people meant to protect you become your greatest adversaries, you must become your own fierce protector. If you are currently shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that diminish your value, take a step back today. Recognize your inherent worth and bravely walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served.